electro.
Alright, so this is me. I'm a systems administrator and developer. So, doing stuff with computers is my thing. I like, making them do my bidding. I like using software of my own or others. Good? Any software, give me some software and I'll do cool things with it. I'm a scout leader. I've been doing that for about 8 years now. This one? Alright. That's fine, I can do that. Working with kids, teaching kids stuff, teaching other people stuff. I enjoy teaching. I'm a bit of an evangelist and activist. I, really love open source software. I'm a member of Open Knowledge Australia. We do meetups every week to, talk about open source software and transparency and all that kind of good stuff. And I also like, privacy, security, diversity, all that stuff. So that's me. This talk is an abbreviated version, a bit of a taste of what I'm going to be talking about at BuzzConf in November. It's not completely polished yet, but it's a bit of an idea of what to expect. We're going to explain the current state of technology engagement, of how people use technology to do things. We're going to discuss some of the issues with this, how we're not exercising technology's full potential, and what we can do about that. What we can do to make people want to use tech to do more creative stuff, than they're already doing. So where are we at the moment? At the moment, people are using tech to do fairly mundane things. We've got everybody using tech. We've got kids using tech from like years 2 and up to play games, to do whatever. And aside from people who are actually involved in the IT industry, like a lot of you people here, so computer science and IT professionals, they're not really making use of all of the potential of technology that is at their fingertips. So we've got phones, for example. Phones are being used for communication, for scheduling with calendars, for recording of information with documents and office applications, for games, social media, and other kinds of entertainment, for watching movies or whatever. Tablets are being used for a similar thing, and they're a little bit more flexible in that you've got a bigger screen, so you can do stuff with office productivity applications and that kind of thing. And then we've got the gaming consoles, of course. Gaming consoles are a big thing with young people these days, and of course, adults as well. But particularly young people are, grabbing gaming consoles, and they're just using these devices that are fairly heavily locked down to do a specific job. Games, social media, entertainment. And finally, in the general case, in the general usage of hardware, we've got regular laptop and desktop computers. They're probably the most mainstream sort of things available. They're upgradable, they're hackable. They're fairly easy to tinker with, but still a lot of people are only using them for, office productivity, entertainment, social media, that kind of thing. But we can use all this technology for a lot of other things. So, we can have real-world hardware applications with things like Arduinos and Raspberry Pis, the BeagleBone or the BeagleBone Black, the BBC microbit. So all of those things are various hardware, which we'll probably hear a little bit more about later. The BBC microbit, for example, you can install a couple of different. It's a tiny little device that's fairly cheap. I think it's only $30. That you can install things like MicroPython on, and you can write Python in your web browser and upload it to this device and go and do real-world things. You can control lights and motors and all that jazz. You can use these things and various other tools to make use of programming for efficiency. I heard a story recently of somebody who was doing their medical degree, and they were doing a work placement, and the hospital they were working for needed them to, during an audit, go and crop like 100 X-rays so that they could have this audit sorted out. And this person sat there laboriously and selected each X-ray and cropped it, and went to the next X-ray and selected it and cropped it and saved it. And the person who was telling this story said, you know you can use programming for this, right? And the person was like, well, yeah, but I don't know how to do that. And so I think that we need to be able to give people the tools, just a little bit of information so that they know where to go and look for information on how to do that kind of thing, so that they're not wasting all of these hours doing these mundane tasks that are really not that difficult to automate. So how can we get there? Particularly with youth, gamification is a big thing. Scratch, for those who don't know, is an MIT programming language written by MIT, which is basically a drag and drop interface with looping and iteration and branching and all this other stuff that allow you to have to move a little dog around a screen and do cool stuff with that, so that it's very colourful, it's very fun, and it doesn't require much, if any, typing, so that you can get people from like 5 years and up, or even younger, to play with this language. And it teaches the concepts without you having to go to all of that extra work. Recently, I was working with a company that uses Minecraft for teaching. Minecraft, the game for the Raspberry Pi, has an API that allows you to use Python to control it, so that you can say to all of these people, oh, look, you know Minecraft. Here's a Minecraft game. But let me show you that you can go and do all of this stuff so that you can automate creating buildings and structures and whatever. So go and play with this language and do cool stuff in this game that you enjoy, and have a look at the extra power that is available to you. And that's fun, and people love that. And then there are the teaching tools like Codecademy and Grok Learning, which are web-based tools generally for teaching languages and dealing with hardware and all this stuff. And they've got really good lesson plans. So make it easy, make it fun. Schools are getting better at covering programming and various other IT stuff because it is so much more mainstream now. But there is a long way to go. And I think that as people involved in tech, it's really valuable for us to tell people about these tools and try and get them out there. A lot of this software and hardware is available cheaply or free these days. Python and MIT Scratch and all this other stuff. You download it free off the internet. A lot of the hardware is fairly cheap. I was talking about the BBC microbit before. It's $25 or $30. Raspberry Pis are a little bit more expensive, but still not prohibitive. And then there are the subscription services like Codecademy and Grok Learning. Codecademy is free for the most part. Or they do have a paid subscription service as well, and Grok Learning is often used for schools, and it's a paid service. But basically, it's really easy to get in tech. It's just that a lot of people don't know where to go looking, and I think that it's really important for us to get people involved in that, because it's where the world is going, and where people who don't know how to automate really basic tasks or hack up their TV or whatever so that they can go and do cool stuff with it, they're going to get left behind. So I think that's what we need to do. So go hack something. Thank you.
Right, yes. On the topic of things that we should not be limited by what we expected. Biomedicine totally fits into that. Once upon a time, you were born with a hearing impairment, you remained with a hearing impairment, and now we have cochlear implants. And there's a whole swath of things that biomedicine has gone, hey, maybe we can touch that. Maybe we can fix things up around the edges. And our skills in this area are getting more and more awesome every day. When I was a kid, I'm a child of the 80s, when I was a kid there was a TV show called Towards 2000. Anyone remember that? Yeah, and then they changed its name to Beyond 2000 or something like that, because they were like, hey, we're getting close to 2000 and we haven't quite got there yet. And then they hid it and took it off TV and no one talked about it ever again. And a lot of the stuff you hear about biomedicine stuff, you're kind of like, well, it's probably in that bucket. I'm hearing about this really cool thing, but will it ever actually hit the market? I don't know. The stuff I'm going to tell you about, some of it will, some of it won't. I'm going to sort of pretend that you know some of the cool stuff that happened last year and the year before, but I reckon some of you might not, and that's okay too. I did want to quickly bring up something. That's not going to work for me. Okay. Who here's seen a 3D printer? Yeah, they were like really new and shiny in like 2006 or 2007 or something. Now we're 3D printing casts. You break your arm or you break your leg, you can have a 3D printed cast, and that's pretty cool. We can 3D print prosthetics, and that's pretty cool. It's old news, but it is pretty cool. But there's a problem with prosthetics. Like, forget for the moment your third arm or your awesome body enhancement and think about somebody who has lost their hand, possibly their arm. Let's go with some part thereof of their arm. When you've lost your arm and you get a prosthetic, and it's great, you can pick things up and you can hold them, and your life is massively improved because having two hands is awesome. One of the challenges you have by default is that there's no good haptic feedback. You pick up an egg and either you drop it or you crush it, because it's really hard until you've learned by pure repetition to know exactly how much pressure to place, because you don't have your hand saying, hey, this is how much pressure you're applying, because you don't have those sensations anymore. That's a bug. We should fix it. This year, we have done some human trials in the way of fixing it. So you can now, or rather, when I say we, I mean awesome people who are not me doing biomedicine stuff, we can now attach electrodes and sensors to the nerve bundles still remaining in someone's arm, and then send them signals from the hand so that they have some sensation of what their hand is touching. They can sense hot and cold and pressure. So they can pick up an egg and hold the egg and do races with the egg or whatever they want to do with their cells, and possibly even just break it open into their fry pan without crushing the egg by mistake. Now that's great if the person's just lost their arm. What about people who are paraplegics or quadriplegics? We've made for them a system where they can essentially use extra arms that aren't strictly theirs, but effectively are theirs, and they can do stuff, but we can't just put one of these sensors in the nerve bundle there, because the damage is higher up. So, single human trial so far. Very successful, very cool. They encouraged the person who was very eager to have this done. I'm not sure that they would have just been able to randomly pick someone else otherwise. They were like, okay, look, think really hard about what it felt like when you used your right hand. And they mapped to where that was in that person's brain, and they tested this consistently for a month. This person always sort of thought about things here when they used their right hand, when they thought, what does cold feel like with my right hand? What does touch feel like with my right hand? And then they inserted electrodes just over the brain in that little area, got it all to meld, and then set that up to sensors similar to what they've done with limb loss. And this person, it's not perfect by any means, but this person can now feel their right arm again. And they can pick eggs up without breaking the eggs. And obviously many more things like that. And that's really cool. Now, there were some issues. As I said, it wasn't perfect. They don't have any fingertip sensation. The suspicion is that this fingertip sensation was, the little sensor that they put there was possibly just too far away from where the fingertip sensation part of the brain was. But this person's like, I've got a hand again. Like, not just something I can control that moves and makes my life a bit easier, but I have touch. And that is really awesome. Last year's experiment, something that you may or may not have heard about, I thought was the best thing ever. That's what made me start reading about all the things that are happening. We've had these artificial spines that we've created for a while. They're flexible plastic spines that you put down, spinal cords, I should say, really. Artificial plastic spinal cords. You put them down the patched bit, the skin grafts onto them, And if you do this to rats and mice, which is the only critters we've done this to so far, the rats and mice can walk across ladders as good as the control mice can, after you've severed their spinal cord and patched one of these in. And that's really cool. However, plastic spinal cords are not a very good analog replacement for actual spinal cords. After about 3 or 4 weeks, the rats and mice stop being able to walk quite as well across these ladders anymore. You kill them, you cut them up, and you find out what's happened is that it's been crushed or otherwise damaged. And it's done damage itself. It's torn at the skin and the repairs it made. Not a good solution, not going to work for humans. So last year they were like, hey, here's a brilliant idea. Silicon. Silicon is stretchy, because that's the one thing that these plastic spinal cords wasn't. So now we've got silicon spinal cords with little gold channels, gold wire, with lots of little tiny breaks in it so that you can stretch it and compress it. They put these in mice and rats and had them walk across ladders and do fun things. And after the end of the experiment, when the control ones were fine and the ones with the plastic were not so fine, the ones with the silicon mice, they didn't slow down. They were like running across the ladders and having a great time. So we may even be able to replace spinal damage soon. And that is also really awesome. And you might be thinking, so why is this tech? Except it is, because if we ever want to have cyborgs, these are the kinds of things that we're going to need to think about. On another printing thing, the 3D printing, we can now, so you might know, once upon a time we 3D printed with like PET plastic and that was it. And now we print with metals and with chocolate. You can buy cool 3D printed chocolate stuff. And now you can 3D print, when I say now and new and all of that, still in development, but prototypes are working. Print with 3D printing with stem cells. We may be able to 3D print organs that are compatible with your body from a small amount of your blood and your marrow to start with. We may be able to completely do away with concerns about having to suppress the immune system for the rest of your life. And that's really cool. And finally, the best thing I want to tell you about, and there's so much more, like I honestly could have spoken for 2 hours, but I do not have the time. The last thing I want to tell you about is gene drive. Related to CRISPR, if you've heard about that, you may have heard and not understood that Monsanto just recently got permission to use CRISPR in some of their stuff. That doesn't mean it's evil, by the way. CRISPR and gene drive, closely related. The concept is wonderful. Once upon a time, you were lied to. Back in high school, when you were told how eye color genetics work, you were probably told that you've got either brown or maybe brown-green or brown-blue or green-blue or blue-blue as your basic types. You get one from your parents, one from each of your parents. And if you've got brown anywhere in there, then you're going to have brown eyes. And if you don't have brown, because brown is dominant, if you don't have brown, then maybe you have green eyes. And if you're very lucky and you have blue-blue, then you have blue eyes. And it's the only way it all works. Not entirely true. It's good enough to understand. If you remember all of that from high school, then you understand the idea of dominant genes. The dominant genes, typically your offspring will have, of course, the one from each parent, and you'll have one of 4 scenarios that can happen. And in the case of parents who both have, say, brown-blue in this scenario, then 1/4 of their children at most will have blue eyes. So, that's all really cool, fascinating thing. It makes that really, so the problem with dominant genes makes it really hard to do really good genetic engineering. Because you're like, okay, I'm going to change that gene. Hooray. Then 2 of these things are going to breed, and 1/4 of them are going to not have the dominant gene, basically. And then you have to keep weeding those ones out or make the terminal or all those kind of things. Gene drive is actually more awesome than that. What gene drive says is rewrite the chromosome in each of these cells with what I want and make it dominant throughout. It breeds true after you've done it, and it allows you to spread a trait throughout a population. Kind of terrifying, kind of awesome. What it does, for those who really want the details, is it damages the chromosome. The chromosome then repairs itself. So the cell then repairs the chromosome. This is a very typical, normal thing for the cells to have to do. Typically, they reach for a template. You've provided a handy template, so it grabs that template. It wraps things up. Joins all the T's and C's and A's and G's in the right way, and hey presto, your new design is in that cell and will be in all of that cell's children forever. How could this be really awesome? I'm going to leave you thinking about the nightmares. A possible use of this is we have come up with a way to genetically engineer mosquitoes to prevent them from being hospitable to the malaria virus. So if one of these mosquitoes that's been genetically engineered bites somebody who has malaria and brings in a whole bunch of malaria-ridden blood into its body, the malaria can't take hold, and the mosquito cannot carry that malaria to another person. That's awesome, right? However, there are obviously, that is awesome. We could totally do that. It breeds true. We could genetically engineer several 100,000, maybe even a few million malaria-resistant mosquitoes, spread them through the area. It would breed true. We could wipe out malaria once this gets far enough down the line. It's much better than eradicating mosquitoes. Much as none of us like being bitten by mosquitoes, they are very important to the ecosystem. So that's pretty cool. Finally, of course, it could also be used in humans to give us the genes that we want. Kind of terrifying, kind of awesome. Really depends on who has the money and who's spending it, right? Anyway, it's all about hacking your body, right? Thank you.
Right, so who am I? I'm obviously a geek. I'm a DevOps engineer. It says there that I'm at Odyssey, but I've just moved to REA, which is a pretty cool place. And I'm going to see if I can get them to send some people to BuzzConf. I like pina coladas. I love getting caught in the rain, the usual things. You might have noticed from previous slides and these slides that I don't like capitalization, and I really like lists. Now, that's obviously not everything about me. What do I do on weekends? It's a bit of an interesting story. I'm actually going to segue back to the previous talk just quickly. I build robotic spiders. Now, when people say why, it's a short story. Essentially, when I was 14, I was hacking some bush to pieces with a machete. And that machete happened to bounce off what I was cutting and put a big hole in my hand. So it doesn't work very well. I have designed electromagnetic muscles to replace human muscles. I had the design when I was 14, which is 20 and change years ago, and it's still an elegant design, but I needed a platform. So I thought, what would be the coolest thing to build robotic muscles for, or electromagnetic muscles for? And of course, spiders. The most beautiful creatures in the world. If you Google cute jumping spiders, it might actually change the opinions of the disbelieving faces around. Now, this spider here is called Steve. He's my first spider, and he actually will look completely different when I bring him to BuzzConf this year, because the design was so poor that I've had to rebuild pretty much all of his plastics, but I was learning. Now, one of the things about building electronics projects in your own time is you don't have a boss who's funding your CNC aluminium lathes. I know to use those, by the way. They're $600,000. You don't have access to many tools or much time, and you're usually doing this stuff in your apartment. And I live in Collingwood, and I was in Fitzroy, so you imagine my apartment's massive. Now, I did lots of research, because I don't sleep very much. I have lots of time, lots of passion, and I figured out that the best thing to do to build the frames, the kind of support structures, and doorknobs that break off, chairs, stoppers, was the 3D printing. I didn't know a lot about it, but I knew some people who had one, so I went around and played with it. This was at the Mill Park Library of all places. They allowed me to play with their printer, and I started building, and the next day I just basically went out and bought a printer. And I've been spending the last 2 years, maybe 2 and a bit, going completely bananas, building robotic spiders. Now, 3D printers are really cool. There's lots of different kinds. They can print lots of different materials. I've got a $8,000 one coming soon. That figure does go up by $50 every time I say it. That prints using light and liquid plastic, and it actually sets the plastic with ultraviolet light. Incredibly accurate, incredibly fast, stupidly expensive, but I need much higher accuracy with what I'm doing next. So there is one big problem with 3D printing. It's hard. It takes ages. I mean, I can sit and watch stars burn out. I got lots of patience. That's quite uncommon. The problem is that it also takes ages to fail. So if your print fails, like this, I'm not actually sure what that middle thing is. It's actually quite beautiful. You can get these amazing prints, and you look at them and you're like, if I designed that, I would be considered an artistic genius. But it's not what you actually want. And the problem is you can wait 30 hours for something to fail. Or you can do what I do, which is hit print and turn up, go to bed, get up in the morning 4 hours later, and it's been not printing for 4 hours, which is a real waste of time. Now, there's a high error rate, which is actually getting better, a lot better. I just bought a new printer for $900, which is cheap, and it's brilliant. I actually haven't had any prints fail, except for in the organic component where I built a bad model. Now that moves on to what I'm actually going to be doing at BuzzConf. Modeling is hard. Nothing will change that. Apart from little tools like Scratch, no, not Scratch. Anyway, there's a bunch of free tools that you can use that are visual, that you can drag them around, but you're not going to be making displaced parts like the battery cage for a 10-kilo spider at the bottom there. Making really elegant models is very hard, and mostly because a lot of people struggle with design, but designing, that's in 2D space. Imagine trying to do that in 3D space, and you've got to take into account torque calculations and snapping motors and burning out power supplies, and no, that's a different part. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take people through Revenge of the Vase. So last year we built a vase out of a cube, and everyone, when I said that, looked at me very vaguely, and I was extremely smug as I took everyone through, showing them how they could do exactly that. But it's going to be a bit more advanced. We're actually going to sculpt in some extra details. So you'll actually be able to put your name on it. I was thinking of putting, part of my tattoo on mine, or maybe one of my spider's cute little faces. They're all very cute. And I will also be bringing the big spider, and I'm hoping he'll be walking this time. So yes, I'll be supported by a company called Arerum. I always get it wrong how to say it. I buy all my plastics from there. He's kindly said that he'll loan me 5 or 6 printers that we're bringing to BuzzConf, so he'll actually be able to design a model and we'll be able to print them. I'm also trying to figure out how we can print other things around the place, like helping for the electronics projects around. Maybe you want something really cool for one of your little buggies, or some waterproof cases for some wireless units. We're going to see what we can do with them. Not sure where we're going to put them yet. But yeah, so I'll be bringing a bunch of printers as well. And if I'm lucky, I'll be able to bring my stupidly expensive printer, and people can see light printing liquid plastic. I don't know why, I just think that's amazing. So yeah, that'll be pretty much me. Thank you very much.
Evening, everyone. My name's Nick. For a living, I'm a consultant. I work with very large computers that are a long way away. And so for fun, I work with very, very small computers that are very close by. Hopefully my slides will appear sometime soon. But anyway. So basically, I'll be talking about the newest generation of microcontrollers, systems on a chip. So you take a standard microcontroller kind of thing, a little tiny computer. You also build in everything else that needs into the one piece of silicon. What is it for full screen on Macs again? I don't know. Apparently not. All right, doesn't matter. So I want to talk about specifically this ESP8266 system on a chip, which is a particularly neat one out of a Shanghai company called Espressif. They're a relatively recent company, relatively new company. They've gotten really suddenly very involved in the community of makers and so on and so forth, where a lot of the previous Chinese companies have been very standoffish about getting involved with very small quantity users like hobbyists and all that. These guys have somehow just engaged and they've gotten excited about this, and they've realised that people are translating their data sheets from Chinese to English, and they've sort of said, wow, okay, thanks for doing that for free. I guess that's good, right? Instead of sort of being very defensive, which a lot of other companies have been in historically. They're a really nice little chipset. I wish I could make these slides the right size for the screen, but never mind. That's an example of the chip itself, an ESP8266. It's a very, very small little chip. There's some guys in Russia called Zeptobars who boiled one of these chips in acid for a period of time and decapped it and then put it under an electron microscope. And when you do that, you get to see the innards of these chips. You get to see all the memory, which looks like a kind of parking lot over there, and you get to see all of the workings of the CPU itself, which are all the funny looking sort of things that look a bit like an industrial plant. And those big circular things are actually the radio built there right into the actual chip itself. I think that's amazing. If you look closer at it, it's almost an artwork in itself, the fact that they've managed to fit this radio right there onto the silicon. And it reminds me of like a chemical plant or something like that, where you've got this combination of strange things all packed in so tightly. It's an amazing piece of technology to fit that into this. They came to prominence as a extra controller that people were using with AVR type things like Arduinos, until eventually someone realized they're several times as powerful as the Arduino they were helping out. And so the kind of relationship turned a little bit backwards there. They're quite a nice little architecture, quite a powerful architecture to program for. What's really exciting about them though, they're a very small chip. You can get them on a module that's big enough so that you can actually find it when you want to use it. These modules are ESP12E module. That's about 24 millimeters long. So it's still a very compact little unit that has the chip itself and some memory under a little can. But there have been little tiny systems on a chip for a long time. What's remarkable about these things is that you can get them for $5. Actually, these slides are now slightly outdated. The price has fallen through the floor and you can now get them for like $3. It's possibly out of date again, possibly $2 by the end of this presentation, I'm not sure. The nice thing about that is it really changes the game. Where a $90 microcontroller kit is something you have to supervise your kids carefully with if they want to play with, a $5 microcontroller, hell, you can make a piece of junk out of a piece of old floorboard, stick it together with glue, or let the kids chase it around. If they break it, it's a $5 chip. It's not a big deal. You can get a complete development environment for these chips for the price of a latte in downtown Melbourne. And if that means you need another one and maybe another latte when you break the first one, that's okay. So this is a junk bot I made out of literally a piece of floorboard left over from our renovations and some motors that were lying around in a box, and up in the top there is one of these chips. That's another little prototype I made of an educational robot project I'm working on. Again, it's so cheap you can afford to just stick things together out of glue and sticky tape and whatever you happen to have lying around. In this particular case, the plastic box cost me more than the CPU. I find that slightly weird. The easiest way to get into these things is a module that is around on eBay, sadly slightly discontinued now, but there's still a lot of them around, called a Node MCU. It packs everything you need onto the one little board. It's very, very easy to deal with. And it's a great way to get started. You can pick them up for, it was $8 to $10 when I wrote this slide the first time. It's now $3 to $6 on eBay. Possibly less by now, I'm not sure. I wrote this slide yesterday, so it might have dropped again. There are many other boards out there as well, and that's an example. This, by the way, is an example of, that's that board on the left is this size, so they're very small. The really exciting thing about these things now is thanks to some very, very smart programmers, we now have a thing called MicroPython running on these boards. Before you had to program them in C or in other languages like that, which is quite difficult. It's quite a big barrier to entry. Python is probably one of the easiest languages to learn, probably one of the easiest educational languages out there. It's also a language that scales very well. I work professionally with Python a lot in my career. So just because it's easier to learn doesn't mean it's not powerful. MicroPython is basically Python 3 that has been made small and fast and light enough that it can run on such a tiny CPU. You can download that now. The last version of these slides had a great deal of instructions about how to build it from source code and get all this sort of stuff, and warned you that you would have to go make a nice cup of tea for a while because it would take about an hour to compile the toolchain. Now you just download the whole thing from the website, which is quite convenient. Then you just need to download a little tool to put it on the chip. Then you plug this in with a USB lead that you probably have lying around, standard micro USB. Put MicroPython on there, and you've got a REPL. A REPL stands for Read, Evaluate, Print Loop. It basically just means you're writing code directly into the programming language without needing an editor, without needing an environment, without needing anything. You can just type code and it runs it. It's kind of like being back in the world of the Apple II for very old people who are used to that world. There's absolutely nothing between you and the machine. You can just type into it and it will do things. You can also do that, because it's a Wi-Fi enabled chip, you can also do that over the internet and connect up to these devices, tell them what to do, send programs to them. It's very simple. This is an example program. You can literally type those things in and get to blinking light in the space of about 10 minutes. That's exciting because it means that you're not left stuck with a box full or a drawer full of boards that you'll never quite work out how to actually use. You can jump straight in, make a mess. If you do blow it up, it costs you $5. It's not a big deal. You're unlikely to blow it up. So that's an example there. What doesn't it have? Doesn't have an operating system, doesn't do multiprocessing. There's one processor. It doesn't really have a lot of memory, and debugging's a bit primitive. But what? It's a good start. So at BuzzConf, we were talking earlier, Rick was talking earlier about the difference between BuzzConfs and most conferences. I talked a lot about MicroPython at PyCon this year, and it was down at Jeff Shed, conference centre, nice room, nice microphone, nice this. At the end of that session, everyone goes away. You might talk over a cup of coffee, you might talk in the bar later, etc., etc. BuzzConf, one of the real things I'm really excited about, it gives us a space that once we finish talking about this stuff and you finish listening to me, we can actually hack on these things. If you're interested in microcontrollers and Internet of Things stuff, I mean, this has to be probably the simplest and easiest way to get into it. The ESPs have to be about the cheapest systems on chip out there. MicroPython has got to be one of the simplest languages to learn. I've got a whole pile of hardware to bring along to BuzzConf that we can play with, and we can set some stuff up and people can get hands-on. If you bring your laptop, you can connect to these devices over the site network. I'll have them all pre-configured with MicroPython, so we won't even need to do that. Write some code, plug some things together. It'll be a really great way to learn a little bit about this exciting kind of platform. By the end of this talk, in fact, this platform will be slightly redundant because it's being replaced by the ESP32, but you'll still learn an awful lot about this particular platform. So yeah, I hope you all come along and we can have a bit of a hands-on play around with MicroPython and actually control some hardware with these devices, see how easy it is to set stuff up. Thank you very much.
Good evening, I'm Andy. Well, I wasn't aware of what all the talks before me were going to be about, but there seems to be a lot of overlap. I'd like to thank Matt for getting people excited about hacking and building things, Adam for his kind offer to 3D print everything we need, and Nick, there's a lot of overlap between what we're going to do and what you're going to do, but the collaboration is good. So anyway, I'm the third Andy. Andrew Fisher gives his apologies. He couldn't be here tonight, which basically means I can say whatever I like and then he has to deliver. And we have the second, the incomparable Andy Kitchen just in the front here, who might pop up at any moment and take over the presentation, if you're lucky. So, last year, Andrew Fisher organised NoBots. Myself and other people helped him out, and some people did go home with robots. And if you have a NoBot, please bring it again this year, and we'll try and do some more stuff with it. And at the same time, after we gave our NoBots workshop, Andy Kitchen spoke about machine learning. So he took us through deep learning, deep dreaming with inceptionism. He showed us about a machine learning program was learning how to play Atari Space Invaders, I think it was, yep. And also he did a part of his presentation was about a JavaScript browser machine learning robot that's basically trying to navigate a maze and avoid poison pills and find food. And we looked at that and going, well, hang on, we've got a machine learning virtual robot and we're making a physical robot. It'd be nice to try and put these two things together. And some of that happened during BuzzConf, but since then, a lot has happened. With Andy and a bunch of other people, we've basically taken this little NodeBot, which is the bottom half of this, and on top we've put a USB battery pack so it goes for a while, and a Raspberry Pi 3, and that's running Google TensorFlow, and it's doing it's taking in vision from the camera and doing road line following, so sort of a very simplistic self-driving robot. So that was something we were just building on as enthusiasts. And Andy's company's then held a lot of machine learning presentations and readings and workshops. It's been fantastic. But then what it led into is work opportunities. Andy's company does consulting around machine learning. I was working for a company where we're building drones that we want to send up, basically get video and telemetry in real time, take it through a data center, and hopefully do useful things for the community, like detect sharks or find search and rescue or asset inspection. And so basically out of BuzzConf for the last year, I've had a fantastic time both as a hobbyist and as a professional. So if that doesn't encourage you to come along, I don't know what will. So what are we going to do this year? Last year we ran a workshop and people built their robot, and there's I guess an opportunity to play more, but there's a whole lot of people that I guess we weren't able to address. All the people didn't come to the workshop. And so what we thought we'd like to do this year is try to connect up the whole camp. So instead of having an Internet of Things, have an Internet of Tents, and hopefully gather sensor data around how warm is your tent or how cold is your tent, and how loud is the band, any other things that we can instrument the camp with. And what we're hoping to do is allow people to play with that throughout the weekend, regardless of your skill level. So there'll be some people who have obviously got some experience in advanced skills, Nick and Adam and Andy and others. We're going to welcome you to help us run this if you've got the time and inclination. There'll be people who attend the workshop, but the people we're really hoping to reach out is all the other people who are attending BuzzConf who maybe don't have programming experience or they're doing something else at the time, and basically say this will be running throughout the whole weekend. There'll be servers and sensors that you can play with, and all you need to be able to do is have a phone and download an app and have a bit of a play, about programming. And so that's the everyone else. So the rough schedule is on Friday we'll set this up with some Wi-Fi access points, so the sensors like the ESP8266s have got something to connect to. Put a few sensors around the camp, and anyone who wants to help us out with that has got experience. That'd be fantastic. On the Saturday we'll run the workshop, and then hopefully people playing around with this is on the Sunday we can have a bit of a show and tell, and so hopefully people will surprise us with what they've been able to build. There's the obvious things I just mentioned before, like what's the temperature of the camp, but hopefully people will bring their own skills and their interests. It might be around biohacking, things like that. Maybe it's measuring your heartbeat and putting that information in. And so after you're doing all this rave rap dancing, how long does it take your heart rate to go back to something sensible? I know, surprises. But that's roughly our agenda, is to be able to, for Andrew, myself and others, to be available throughout the weekend to collaborate with others like Nick on the ESP stuff, and to just generally be available to help you hack the camp, hack your tent. So architecturally, this is what it looks like. You've got up the top is a bunch of sensors and actuators. One of our ideas is like with a little servo motor. If you basically put a little dial on it, it becomes a gauge. And so you can take with a piece of A4 paper, you can just get a pen and just scribble on and make your own gauge. It could be a temperature gauge, it could be decibels, it could be how good you're feeling, and then you'll be able to control the servo and the dial and just be able to have like a barometer of information. So it's nice to make it sort of really low tech, really craft-like. And so that's all your sensors and actuators. Then there's a server called MQTT, which is basically a fancy way of saying it sends and receives messages. And so all the messages from the camp can come to this server, and they can then be, so you basically publish these messages, like how hot is it, or how loud is it, or how many people have walked past. And then you can then put that into Influx database, which is time series. So that basically is the history of the event. So everything is captured that way. But hopefully not in a creepy way, because we'll all be able to only put in what we're interested in, and also everyone can see it, as opposed to the creepy things that go in the world where someone else owns a database and you've got no idea what they've captured about you. So it's meant to be about by people for people, as opposed to by corporations for corporations. Now down the bottom is what's called Node-RED, and I'll show you a little bit more about Node-RED. But that basically gives you a drop and drag environment, so you can connect up sensors. You can visualize what's going on with sensors without having to be a programmer. But however, if you are a programmer, you can jump in with your favourite language, be it JavaScript or Python, C, assembler if you're keen, and you can augment the information you're getting from these sensors and do interesting things with it. And then for user interfaces, just your mobile phone. So you should be able to wander around the camp and just check on your mobile phone, see what's going on. Earlier chatting to Adam, one of the thoughts was if he is fortunate enough to bring all these 3D printers, if they're busy, you might want to go, is that 3D printer free? And rather than having to walk halfway across the camp to find out if it's free or not, we'll hopefully be able to instrument the 3D printers. And we're basically chatting about, well, how could we do this? So one idea was to basically put an Arduino with an accelerometer on it, and if the 3D printer's rocking, then it's still busy. But if another way was to basically have a Raspberry Pi with a camera and just see if there's any basic motion detection. If the printer head's moving, then it's still busy. But the idea is that it's up to people's imagination as to how they capture this information and what they do with it. So in a little bit more detail, that's some of the technology. So there'll be servers. These can run on something like a Raspberry Pi. So if you have a Raspberry Pi, bring it along. We'll help you install the servers for basically for handling the messages, storing the data, and then manipulating the data. User interfaces like Node UI give you basically a drop and drag way of presenting gauges and sparkline graphs and buttons to push and things like that. You don't have to program, but if you want to, you can program in JavaScript using the NodeBots technology which we bought last year for the robots, which is basically just using JavaScript to wrap objects. And if that's not your cup of tea, you can use Python or Ruby, Java, it doesn't really matter. And then for sensors and actuators, we'll be bringing along a bunch of ESPs, which fortunately Nick has saved me, he's done a much better presentation than I would, but that's your basic ESP. Back in 1990s, when I was hanging out with some people from Sun Microsystems, they basically said, when you can get a connected microprocessor for $2, it will change everything. And, 25 years later, it's true. When you can basically take a $2 microprocessor and connect anything to the internet, you can do incredible things. So that's that processor. When you take an ESP8266 and put it in a weatherproof box and add a solar panel and lights, hang on, this might actually work, hang on. Yep, I can thank John Spencer for that. Everything should have blinky lights, so we'll have no one will get any sleep because all their tents will be blinking. So this has got a humidity sensor and temperature sensor and that stuff in a weatherproof box and solar, so it'll be interesting to see how long this lasts, but John Spencer, we have John to thank for that. And that's nasty, sorry. This is a Raspberry Pi which has got a full flight controller on it. So this Raspberry Pi knows which way it's pointing, it's got GPS, it knows where it's at, it knows how high it is, it's got a camera so it can do vision feed into one of Andy's insane machine learning things. It's more mind-blowing is probably a better word. So you can go a fair way for not a lot of money to create a full instrument package that you can basically stick anywhere, hopefully for good, not evil. So this is what Node-RED looks like. It's on the left-hand side, you've got a whole lot of blocks that represent inputs and outputs. You've got things for connecting up to web servers, Facebook, Twitter. So basically, you can do something like drag in a temperature sensor, then drag across a little bit of logic to say is that temperature above 30 degrees. Then drag across another node which represents Twitter, and hey, if it's above 30 degrees, tweet someone, get me a pina colada or whatever you need. And on the right, whenever you select a box, it gives you a whole lot of information about how to use that node. So this just runs in your web browser. You point your web browser at the Node-RED server, and off you go. When you double-click on one of these objects, You get a little user interface that allows you to do things like give it a name. This is for generating random numbers, so you can basically say how often you want that number to be generated, what you want that number range to be, and it's the same for all these objects. Basically just click, drop and drag and configure it. And if you're really keen, some of these objects can also do a little bit of JavaScript, so it's like 3 or 4 lines of JavaScript that basically takes information off a GPS unit and sends it on its way to be displayed. One of the modes is called Node Red User Interface, and just simply by drop and dragging, you say, oh, I've got my temperature, I'd like to hook that up to a graph, and so basically just drop and drag the temperature sensor, drop and drag the graph, hook them together, point your web browser, and you've basically got a graph for yourself immediately. Or you can hook it up to a gauge or a slider. You have buttons for input. So basically what we hope to be able to do is by providing this hardware and software infrastructure, people will be able to experiment with capturing data from the camp and doing things with it. Just down the bottom right here, you can actually see that's a little node that shows you, basically gives you a Google map, and so you can basically say, put things on there. Like, if you love spiders, you can say, well, show me where all the spiders are at BuzzConf. There will be several. So that's another picture of some of the sensors. So that's the ESP, Raspberry Pi, a couple more ESPs. We'll bring a bunch of sensors and actuators as well, and I recommend you go and raid Nick's barrel of fun. So these sensors will be either connected via Wi-Fi or USB. Or if you want to just use your laptop, it can also it can generate and consume data as well. Here's some ideas for several things you might like to do. We'll see how we go with power. Rick's informed me there'll be mains power everywhere, but I know that doesn't strike me as, that's just too easy. It's always fun to try and no, having mains power is great, but really with I think things is you've got to assume that power isn't going to be somewhere convenient. Like if you're trying to do wearables, you don't have mains power on your body, so experimenting with how long can you have a sensor run using a battery, or what can you really do with solar panels, I think it's a valuable thing, because many of the more interesting and tricky applications just don't, mains power isn't part of the equation, so we'll see how we go. Yeah, so I'd like really inviting people to come prepared. We'll bring an amount of hardware and software and set up and be there to assist you. If you bring along all these creative thoughts about what could you possibly gather in terms of information, how could you use that? I highly recommend chatting to someone like Andy to chat at machine learning, machine learning is really about recognising patterns, and so if we generate enough information, hopefully we can try and look for some interesting patterns in that information. And we're trying to make this as low barrier to entry as possible, but there's depth there, so no matter what level of expertise and experience you have, I'm sure there'll be something challenging for you to do. So hopefully you'll bring a laptop. If you've got hardware you've got from previous workshops or things you've played with and want some help with, please bring those along. Arduinos and so on. If you've got a USB power brick, that can be handy as well. And if you've got robots, we'll see if we can connect it all up. So thanks for your time. That was the BF Robots guys. They had an intriguing mailbox that looked like it needed to be fed more often, or maybe it was. So thank you.
Hey, by a yell, a clap, a scream, whatever it is, how many of us were at BuzzConf last year? How many of you are already going this year and it's going to be your first time? You guys are in for an amazing treat. I went last year, and I tell you what, when I came away from the end of it, there's one word I will give you that I am still on a high, and that is inspiration. The talks that you're going to hear, the workshops, the robots that you're going to build, the weather that you're going to be checking, and the spiders, all these things are going to inspire you in a way that you cannot yet grasp. Ask the people that were there last year. You're in for a real treat. For everybody that's coming along, what I wanted to do was capture some of that inspiration. What I wanted to do was to, after we've all heard about some amazing biomedical stuff and the ability to print prosthetics, after we've all had a play on a 3D printing machine and made some, art piece. We'll call them an art piece rather than an accident. You know, after you've played with some MicroPython on a tiny little chip that is just so powerful, after you've built your first MBot, you're going to be on a high, and you are going to have a million ideas racing through your head. You're going to be thinking about all the things that you could do, you know, that with all this stuff, with all these things that you've learned, with all these things that have inspired you. And so what I want to do is create a hackathon around inspiration. So this is not a normal hackathon which goes for a full weekend and we drink lots and lots of caffeine and at the end of it produce a prototype of some kind of website or something like that. No. Let's spend the weekend being inspired. Let's finish the weekend, though, by getting together and talking about the ideas we've come up with for making the world a better place. Let's get together in what I'm calling the No Moving Parts Hackathon. That's because we're not going to make anything. We're going to do the brainstorming part of a hackathon. We're going to think about the things we could do that we don't have the ability to do right there on the weekend. You might be inspired after you come along to this thing to go out and buy an $8,000 light and plasma 3D printer. Well, that's cool. You haven't got it yet. But the point of this hackathon is to come along and say, if I had that, here's an idea that would change the world. Or even, here's an idea that would change my job. My job would be so much easier if I could 3D print a thing, or I had an MBot that could run around and do something, or, if only I had a chair that could understand my body better. Any of these things are going to come to your mind during the weekend. And the plan for the No Moving Parts Hackathon is to grab that inspiration and start to brainstorm on it with a group of people. And then we'll present our ideas to everybody, just like a normal hackathon. The only thing is we won't have actually built something. And so we're not limited by our ability on the weekend to produce something. What we are limited by is our brain's ability to conceive something amazing. And so what I want to do is give you that space to come along and dream and be inspired with other people. It's going to be an amazing weekend. I can't wait. I thought I'd come along tonight and hear some talks and go, okay, now I know which ones I want to go and listen to. Tonight's just got me even more confused. I don't know what I'm going to go and hear on the weekend, because it is going to be an amazing weekend. And thank you to those of you that have come along tonight and presented, but you have got me more confused. But thank you so much.